Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. So continuing on the last few slides about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do we prove that there's only one deity? Okay, so we talked about Occam's razor and the simplest of two competing theories. The thing is, if you want to prove, another way to prove that there's only one deity that deserves to be worshipped. So we're talking about the oneness in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah uses the idea that there's only one creator to prove that you should only worship Allah. And this is very important to understand the arguments in the Quran. So the Quran is always utilizing this way of argumentation so that people understand. They say, look, if there's only one creator and you're willing to accept that and you arrive at that conclusion, why do you worship all these other things which didn't create anything? So basically, what's known as the Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, or the oneness of Allah in creation, is being used to prove Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, meaning the divinity that only Allah deserves to be worshipped. And you see this all the time and time again. So here's an example of one verse out of the several ones. Or he who has created the heavens and the earth and sends down for you water from the sky. I mean, Allah created this and He sent down the water. If you accept that part, we cause to grow with it gardens full of loveliness and delight. So it's clear it's Allah doing that. Then it says, it is not in your power to cause their trees to grow. Okay. Is there another deity besides Allah? So now the question is, it's talking about creation, and now it changes over to deity. Deity meaning worship. So if Allah does all of this, why are you worshipping other people? And then He says, no, they are a people who steer away from truth. So basically what Allah is saying, in a nutshell, basically He's saying is, someone who cannot create, why should you worship them? So all you do is, this is a test. It's a very simple litmus test. So somebody says, you know what? This saint or this guy, in this village, he's such a pious person. And he performs miracles. And he can make your coffee turn into water and your water turn into coffee or something like that. And you say, you know what? Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, you got to come and visit this guy because everyone goes and we all worship him. And you say, well, wait a minute. Okay, turning the coffee into whatever, water into coffee, that's really interesting. And I would like to find out how he does that. That'd be interesting. But to worship him, he didn't create all of these things. He didn't create the heavens and the earth. He didn't start himself. He didn't create himself. He was a little child. So to say that we're going to worship someone who was not able to create in the first place doesn't make any sense, no matter how many interesting, strange things that they're doing. So the Quran always utilizes this as an argument for there's only one to be worshipped. So they say, do they associate as partners with Him those who create nothing and they themselves are created? So there's the test for you. Why would you worship something that's created when you could be worshipping the Creator in the first place? Very simple argument, but it's a very powerful argument that people get confused and they don't follow. Lastly, on this, is that Allah demands the idea of you associating Allah with being one. So Tawheed, meaning Allah being one, the unity of Allah or the oneness of Allah, is a demand. The reason why it's important, because people, again, we saw it in a different class. People today have a very spectator culture. They're interested in, I would like to know what's going on. It's like, you know what? There's an accident on the freeway and you're driving. People get past the accident. The accident is already cleared off to the shoulder. But there's still traffic. It's jammed. Why is it jammed? What is that traffic called? Spectator traffic. Why is there spectator traffic? The traffic is not blocking the road. It's because everyone wants to look and see what happened. Is the guy burning? The car's on fire. Is his arm burning? Is he burning alive or is he not? Are you going to get out and help the guy? Are you going to actually, is any one of these people who are watching, are they going to stop? I want to see exactly what happened, and they slow down. Wow. Look at the glasses all over the place. Guys being escorted out, people crawling on the ground and everything. That's interesting. And then you drive away. Spectator culture. So it's all about knowledge and knowing and everything. And that's why when people understand the oneness of Allah as being something only focusing on knowledge, that you know that Allah is one, then they start saying, you know what, why is Allah so interested in knowing? Why is it such a big deal if you know whether Allah is one, you don't know whether Allah is, why is it such a big deal? Why is it a major sin? Why is it such a big sin in Islam? Because it's not just about knowledge. It's a demand that Allah makes, that this is a sign of respect to Allah, which we're going to talk about more. This is a demand as well as knowledge. So it's the first commandment actually. So when Allah says, for example, your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him alone. This is clear. Allah is saying that you have to only worship Him. But if you take a look at another verse, before you looked at this verse, the famous verse, Ayatul Kursi, the verse of the throne, right? It starts out, Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. That Allah, there is no other deity besides Him. Or go back to Fatiha, right? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. So, praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, right? Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. So, the Lord, the creator of the universe, the merciful, the compassionate, all of these things that is describing Allah with. But it doesn't specifically tell you, and you need to do this too, right? So a lot of people, they look at that, it's just like knowledge. It's like, oh, that's good to know. It's not good to know because it's also a demand that Allah commands us to do. Okay, so that's important to understand. Allah has said, do not take two deities. He is but one God. So it's a demand. It's not just knowledge. So that's an important point because people tend to focus too much on knowing aspect. And you say, well, if I didn't know, I just made a mistake in my knowledge. We make mistakes all the time. So why is Allah going to hold me accountable for a mistake in my knowledge or my understanding of something? I made a mistake in understanding. It's more than a mistake in understanding. It's a violation of a command where people have the ability to arrive at the knowledge and then they're going against that state that they've actually been able to arrive at. This is the problem with shirk or with associating partners with Allah. So moving on to today's topics. So the next thing we need to talk about is that nothing resembles Allah. Okay, this is very important. All of these points are really important to understand who Allah really is. So nothing resembles Allah. That means that Allah is one with respect to His essence. So what does essence mean? It's called in Arabic Zat. The essence of Allah is the constitution, for lack of a better word. In fact, that's not even the best word. But what Allah actually is. Like for example, human beings. We're composed of cells, right? It's part of our constitution, of our composition. And within those cells are composed of atoms, right? And then we're composed of parts. So looking at it from different perspectives, we can say that this is our constitution, this is what we're made up of, right? That's known as our essence, right? And then there's another part of our essence about life that we don't exactly know anything about how that functions. How does life actually work? We know the effects of it, how things breathe and the mind works and all of that, but the essence of life is a secret, it's unknown. But that's our essence. So the essence of Allah in and of Himself is something that we believe is one. There's not two essences or two actual people who are defined as Allah. But that's not the only thing. Allah is also unique and one with respect to His attributes and His actions. So the things that Allah is defined with His attributes are also one. And this is a cause of people making a lot of mistakes about Allah. So it's very important to understand. Let's take some examples. What are attributes? Allah is the attribute of knowledge. Like when we say Allah is the mighty, the powerful. This is an attribute when we say Allah is knowledgeable. That's an attribute of knowledge. Allah is wise. That's an attribute of wisdom or an attribute of knowledge. When we say Allah is all powerful, that's an attribute of power. He has attributes of hearing. He has attributes of seeing, right? Sight and knowing, this part of His knowledge as well. So all of these things, it means that nobody can share with Allah in any of His attributes. Okay, any of the attributes that we mentioned in all His other attributes. So if you were to describe a person as being knowledgeable, say, you know what, this guy is, just so knowledgeable, has so much knowledge, they've studied, they've read all these different books, they've attended all of these different classes, really knowledgeable person. when we say that person is knowledgeable, and then we say Allah is knowledgeable, right? Are we talking about, is there any relationship between the two in reality? They're so far apart that they're almost like we're using two completely different words. Right? That's the distance. So when you say that Allah is knowledgeable, even though you're using the same attribute of knowledge compared to any person, no matter how knowledgeable they are, they're so far infinitely apart that it's almost as if we should have been using two separate words. So then the question is, why use the same word? Right? Why use the same word? Why should we just use a different word for Allah? Why use knowledge for human beings and then knowledge for Allah? Why not use a different word? Okay. You say, so what does that mean? He's all-knowing. So the name should be all-knowing, basically. Okay. That's true in a sense. That's his name, yeah. But his attribute is still his knowledge, yeah. Like for example, you can say that Allah is alim. Alim meaning knowing, knowledgeable. Right? In Arabic, you use the same word and you say, you know what, this guy, he's alim. Is it allowed? You can say he's alim, but you can't say he's alim. Okay, let's take another word. If you say Allah is rahim, it's correct? It's correct. Allah is merciful. The word rahim. Correct or not correct? Correct. Okay. If I say Brother Muhammad is rahim, allowed or not allowed? It's allowed in Arabic. So why using the same word for Allah and the same word for people? There's no rahim. No, if you say Muhammad rahim, that's the predicate. It's the khabar of the sentence. There's no al in the predicate of the sentence. No. You find verses in the Quran where it says rahim without the al. Because it's in the predicate position of khabar. So how do you explain it? Exactly. So if you had a different word which didn't mean anything, how would you be able to understand what the attribute of Allah is talking about? So it gives you kind of an approximation or an appreciation for what we're talking about at least. Right? So when you say Allah is knowledgeable and this other guy is knowledgeable, they're two completely different, terms, two different understandings, but the idea of knowledge gives us an understanding of what we mean by Allah being knowledgeable. Otherwise, if you made up some random word, it wouldn't make any sense because it has no definition for you, right? So good. So even though the same word is used, they're completely different. So two different words should have been used, but we had to use the same word. Take an example, okay? The fruits of paradise. What are some of the names of the fruits mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith about what's going to be given to us in paradise? What kind of fruits? What kind of food we're going to get? Grapes, pomegranates, date palms. Okay, wine. We're going to get wine in paradise. Does everyone agree with that? We're going to get wine. Does it intoxicate? No, it doesn't intoxicate. All right, good. So we're getting wine, right? All of these things we're going to get. So these things, they also exist in this life. Now, what is the taste going to be like in paradise? Infinitely superior, right? So the thing, if you talk about grapes, all right, and you're like, you're going to get grapes, and they're going to be the most amazing thing you've ever tasted. You say, but I don't like grapes, right? The grapes that we're talking about there are completely different. It's just for people who generally like grapes. They're going to get some kind of appreciation for what we're talking about. Otherwise, if we said, you know what, there's going to be this amazing food. It's called right? What are you going to associate that with? Like, okay, that's interesting. I'm looking forward to this thing. It doesn't give you any idea. So the same thing. Two same words, but infinitely different to give you an understanding, at least of what this is going to be like. So Allah says, there is nothing at all like Him. This is one verse, and it's a very important verse upon which we build other aspects of theology upon. There is nothing like Him, meaning there's nothing like Allah at all. Okay. By the way, let me comment on this since we covered it in an earlier class. The Him referring to Allah is a male. Why is that done? Is Allah male? Then is Allah female? Is Allah neuter then? Why are we utilizing the male? So if you want to show respect to someone, use the masculine form. So if there's a really, really respectable woman comes in, we start calling her he. But this is third person. This is huwa. No, this one is this huwa, right? So this is third person. First person I understand. So this is third person. So what about third person? Why he? So in Arabic there is a neutral term, but in English there's no neutral term. Okay, so in English, if something is neither masculine nor feminine, what do we call it? It. Okay. So we have it in English, the neutral term. Actually in Arabic you don't have the neutral term. Okay, so in Arabic you have everything masculine or feminine. So a car is, for those who know Arabic, feminine. What is the sun? Sun is feminine. Yeah, what is the moon? Moon is masculine. Alright, so all of these different things. The reason is, how do you define what is masculine? Okay, we're going to learn that next quarter in Arabic. The thing is, there is no other word. So technically, the translation could have read, or perhaps should have read, it. But when you say it, referring to neither masculine nor feminine in English, common language, what is it refer? What is the implication? It's a thing, but what is the further implication? Non-living, further implication. Is that a respectful thing? If you take a child and you say it, it's not a respectful thing, right? So it's actually disrespect. That's why it was not used. So you have to make a choice when translating. You have to choose one or the other. Now, why in Arabic did it come masculine? Because there's no other option. It had to be either masculine or it had to be feminine. You pick one. And why was masculine chosen? Because masculine is the default. It's the default. When you don't have anything, when you use a plural and you say 4 guys and 2 women came, what do you use? There's a female plural, there's a masculine plural. Which one do you use? Use the masculine plural because it's the default. It's the default, right? And then some people say that, interestingly, in chromosomes, right, male chromosomes and female chromosomes, what letters are in the female chromosomes? In the female chromosomes? XX. What are in the male chromosomes? Who knows for sure? I'm hearing all these different answers. XY. Right? So they're both in there. Some people say that interestingly. Anyway, that's just a side note there. So since nothing is similar to Allah, it says there's nothing like Allah at all. And then he says, and no one is comparable to Him in any way. And almost every Muslim has this verse memorized. Hopefully. What is this verse? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Almost everyone has this memorized. And no one is comparable to Him. So one, there's nothing like Allah. So anything, if anyone tries to say this is like Allah, it's incorrect. And nothing is comparable to Allah in reality. You cannot compare Allah to anything in its absolute form. So what does that mean? That's referring to direct analogies. Okay, so if you try to use an analogy to describe Allah, this is where a lot of, parents or sometimes educators or something may make a lot of mistakes. And this is where a lot of misconceptions arise when people hear. So for example, if someone were to say that, Allah is like a father. Can you say that? Allah is like a father? Say, well, in what sense? Fathers care for their offspring. Allah cares for His creation. So therefore you say Allah is like a father in the sense that He cares. Can you use that? Is it a direct analogy? It's a direct analogy. So we shouldn't be using that. It's better not to use it. Okay? So we shouldn't use it. Another example. Allah is like, you imagine you're trying to explain to some children, right? They're asking you, so what is Allah like? And He knows everything. He knows everything? Yeah, He knows everything. So He's like He's like a supercomputer? So yeah, He's like a supercomputer. In what? In His knowledge, in His knowing things. Is that a good statement? No, because it's direct. Again. So that's a direct analogy, and we should not use direct analogies. Why? Not because they may be totally false, not because they have no basis whatsoever, but because it will confuse people into start thinking that Allah is equated with something along these lines. And that can become very problematic. All right? I remember when I was young, and you probably have your own stories, I was told that, I asked, what color is Allah? Somebody gave the answer, Allah is all colors. I started thinking, all colors, and you're trying to envision it, and then the Disneyland light parade, came in my mind, and I started thinking all these colors, and that was what was stuck there. That's why it's very dangerous to try and use direct analogies, because people will start picturing that, and this is one of the ways that idol worship is actually began. When people start saying, well, Allah is like this or like that. So what do? Some people come along and make a painting. Some people come along and make a statue. And they say, look, this is a representation of Allah's power because He's like this or He's like that. And then this mythology begins. So you have to be very, very careful about that. Okay, so indirect analogies, or what's called the analogy of preference, is something that's okay. And it's something that Allah has used in the Quran Himself. Okay, so for example, if we have any examples, no, examples are not here. Examples are in the notes. So for example, if someone were to say that, say Allah is merciful, say yes, He is merciful. So how merciful is He? Say Allah is more merciful than even a mother to her own children. It's an indirect analogy. There's a difference between saying Allah is like a mother and saying that Allah, in one of His attributes, Allah is more merciful than even a mother would be to her own child. And then you start explaining that. Say, would any mother want her child to, be thrown into the fire? Would any mother want her child to do this? Or if you say, you know what? Allah is more knowledgeable than a supercomputer that can calculate all of these things. The difference is that it's indirect. So you're making a comparison. So the person has the computer here, has Allah completely in a separate area. When you say Allah is like this thing, then it becomes associated together and leads to many confusions. That's why there's a difference between direct analogy and indirect analogy. Okay, and Allah uses this in the Quran, and there's many times in the hadith, in the Prophet, peace be upon him, he used it as well. So that's the resemblance. The next is, His essence cannot be comprehended. So we talked about what does essence mean. So we can only know Allah through His attributes. Because if you can't know His essence, you can only know Allah through His attributes, but you cannot know Him through His essence, which is what we're going to prove right now. So His essence is not something that you can figure out. So if you look at a human being without researching, without being able to figure out, without looking in detail, would you be able to figure out that the human being, imagine someone who's never studied science or anything, would they be able to figure out this person is made of cells? Would they be able to figure out this person is made of atoms? No. You can't tell exactly what their constituent components would possibly be. So the essence of Allah is not something that can be known by people, because even if you were to research and look in detail, you would not be able to figure it out, because it's Allah who's infinite. So it's not something you can figure out. Therefore, the way you know Allah is through His attributes, which He's informed us about. So let's take a look at what Allah says. Whereas they cannot comprehend Him with their knowledge. Right? They cannot comprehend Him with their knowledge. No matter how hard you try. All the philosophers that go into caves, and Plato sat in his cave, and Descartes went up in the mountains and started thinking and all of that. No matter how hard you think and you say, I'm just gonna figure this out. I'm gonna figure out exactly what and who Allah is in His essence. No matter how long you do that or how intelligent you are, you're never gonna be able to figure that part out. Because it's not something that Allah has informed you about. So therefore, there's no way you can figure it out that way. It's not something that your mind can even encompass. So, even if Allah did tell you, now we're talking about His essence. Even if Allah did tell you about His essence, this is exactly how my essence is. And this is, my being and my composition, or whatever, we can't even use words for it. But this is what I'm formed of and all of that. In that case, we would not even be able to understand it. And the reason why we wouldn't be able to understand it is one simple example. Allah is infinite. And our minds are finite. Allah is unlimited. And our minds are limited. So let's do a very quick exercise. Okay? I want you to think about the number 1 billion, which has 9 zeros. Right? Picture it in your mind. Do you see the zeros? You see the number there? 1 billion. You see it there? Okay. We're going to up it to 1 trillion now. You see the number there? Okay. We're going to put it to that number that was the calculation probability of the protein. Right? 950 zeros. So you're zooming yourself out. Can you imagine it? 950 zeros? Zoom out a lot. Can you imagine it? From a distance, I'm not saying you can see the details of the zeros. Can you pretty much see the number there? You can see the number there. Okay? Now I want you to imagine infinity. And try and zoom out as much as you can. Can you picture it? You can't. Try to encompass the number infinity. You can't. All you see is just a bunch of things going here, and then your vision is gone. You see a bunch of things going the other direction, well, in a number going this direction, and you can't imagine it. Can you imagine the largest house that's the size of 20 times the size of the earth? You zoom out and you can picture it. Imagine a house that's infinitely large. You can't imagine it because your mind can never grasp something that is infinite. No matter how hard you try, you'll never be able to encompass it. And that's exactly what Allah is saying. You cannot comprehend Him. You cannot encompass any of Allah because Allah is infinite and you're finite, no matter how hard you try. So you'll never be able to do it even if it was explained to you. So therefore, it's something that cannot be done. And that's why we've not actually been given information regarding the essence of Allah. Yet there are always people who say, well, I want to know exactly what Allah is. You couldn't even if you were told, you wouldn't be able to figure it out. So that's one aspect. His attributes are perfect with no defects. We're talking about the attributes of Allah, knowledge, power, wisdom, mercy, all of these things. They are perfect and they have no defects. It's very important to understand that. The reason is because when people associate partners with Allah, one of the reasons why they associate partners is due to their ignorance about who Allah really is. They don't know who Allah really is. You say the first person that seems interesting or that has a lot of interesting attributes or qualities or whatever, say, oh, that's a person worthy, we should pray to him or something like that. You say this guy can fly. He can fly? Yeah, he can fly through the air. Wow, man, that's amazing. And look, everyone else is praying to him. Let's pray to him too. Okay, let's pray to him. Because they don't know who Allah is. They don't realize, if they knew who Allah was, they would realize a guy who can fly, there's nothing impressive about that at all. Compared to what Allah is capable of. Compared to the power that Allah actually has. So, the Quran uses this technique, in the Quran, Allah uses this technique of defining the attributes of Allah so that you know what Allah is and you know what Allah is not. And then you realize who should be worshipped and who shouldn't be worshipped. That's why when you find, again, read those verses that you already know, like Ayatul Kursi, the verse of the throne. It's defining Allah, right? Allah is one, there is no deity except Him. Al-Hayyul Qayyum, the living, the sustainer, the self-subsisting. When Allah is described as, the compassionate, Allah is described as all of these things. Every time Allah is being defined, it's not just random knowledge. There's a reason why that knowledge is there. That knowledge is once you learn and you understand who Allah really is, then another thing you learn is who Allah is not. So anyone who measures up to these characteristics, it's not the same. It's not the same person. It's like somebody, you've never experienced who a real scholar is. A real Muslim scholar, for example, right? And all you do in your community, everyone's like a self-proclaimed scholar. Everyone, they read little English translation of the Quran here and there. They throw in their own interpretations and everything. And they start thinking, no, this guy, he has good YouTube videos, He's a really good speaker. This other guy, no, he makes really good arguments and everything. And then all of a sudden, one time somebody describes to you that, you know what, a real Muslim scholar, they have knowledge of Arabic grammar. They have knowledge of every detailed verse of the Quran in terms of its reason for revelation. They have knowledge of the principles of Islamic law. They have knowledge of the hadith. And they have knowledge of the narrators of the hadith. And they have the knowledge of the authenticity. Once you start getting that, you're like, this guy's a joke. This guy doesn't know anything, right? So now that you know what a scholar really is, this guy's like a fool. This is like some guy who just read like a few books in his house and he doesn't know anything. So it gives you kind of an understanding of, this is what we should be aiming for. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being defined clearly in the Quran so that you know who He is, you value His worth, and you know who is not Allah or who is not worthy of being worshipped in the first place. Allah says, Allah, there is no God besides Him, the living, the subsisting, neither slumber nor sleep overtakes Him. So there's a great example, right? Slumber and sleep. Getting tired, right? Getting exhausted, getting weary is a characteristic of almost all people, right? All living things for the most part. They get tired, they need to energize, they run out of energy, they need to sleep, they need to rest, all of that. So this is an example. Allah is not affected by any of these things. He does not get weakened by any of these characteristics. So this guy, for example, we were talking about the flying guy, right? The flying guy goes to sleep, he gets tired after flying around. When you see him sleeping and you say, this guy, he can't even sustain his own power. Right? Look at Allah. Allah doesn't sleep. He doesn't get tired. Nothing happens. And this guy, if you tell him, okay, I want you to fly for 48 hours. He can't. He's too tired. Right? He's got to rest, for example. So this guy cannot be worthy of worship. Another example. Or he who has created the heavens and the earth and sends down for you water from the sky. We cause to grow with it gardens full of loveliness and delight. It is not in your power to cause their trees to grow. Is there another deity besides God? So we saw this verse a little while ago. It's talking about if Allah created all of these things and He was able to do all of these things, how can you take somebody else who doesn't have the attributes to do these things? So somebody goes and all of a sudden he says, okay, I'm going to perform some miracle. So he walks up to the wall and all of a sudden some water comes out of the wall. Like some water comes out of some statue or something. So that's interesting. I don't know how he did that. However he did that. But that doesn't compare to sending down the rain. That doesn't compare to creating everything in the first place. So why worship this second person when you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's way above and beyond that? So it's giving you the example that Allah deserves to be worshipped because of the perfection of His attributes. And if you have anyone else with defective attributes, they don't deserve to be worshipped. It's very simple. Right? So that's what we're talking about when we say the attributes of Allah are perfect without any defect. So lastly here, for example, take anybody who's worshipped, right? If you just look at their knowledge, look at the attribute of their knowledge. Does anyone have complete knowledge besides Allah? Does anyone even claim to have complete knowledge? When somebody says, look, Nostradamus or whatever his name was, this guy predicted the future and he got some predictions right. Or his fortune tellers, right? The guys who say, I can, read the magic ball and I can, take out my tarot cards, or, give me your palm and I can, read the hands of your palms and everything like that. Can these people, can they have knowledge of all the future? So even the attribute, even if supposedly they were able to do something, which, there's actually a very simple response. That, have you noticed that all those fortune tellers, you've probably seen, has anyone seen those fortune teller stores? What rating would you give in terms of stars, right? Like, Burj Al Arab, the hotel, right? It's a 7-star hotel. Hilton is like a 4-star hotel. Ritz-Carlton is like a 5-star hotel. What stars would you give to their offices, on the street? You've seen them, right? And be honest. What stars are we looking at? It's like a 1-star, 2-star place. It's like a place, the Starbucks is cleaner and nicer than their office. Right? Even from the outside, right? In terms of luxury and how nice it is. If these people could tell the future in reality and get it right all the time, can't they just get the lottery right once? Right? To improve their, building a little bit? Can't they just get the stock market right, once? Or is it they can only get, people's hand like who you need to marry? That's all they can get. So these people definitely are fraud. But it shows you and they say, no, we can't do all of it. Say, well, your attribute of knowledge is deficient. Therefore, why should we, if anyone worships them or whatever, thinks that they're something special, why should we have a special respect for you when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything? He knows the past, He knows the present, He knows the future. Same thing. Their power. Right? You say, well, Allah has ultimate power. You say, well, this guy's very powerful. He can do this, he can do that. Same thing. He needs food, he needs drink, he needs rest, he needs to go to the bathroom. He doesn't have ultimate power. So that everyone else's attributes are limited and the attributes of Allah are perfect without any defects whatsoever. Now let's talk about some of the attributes of Allah. Allah is the mighty. Okay. The mighty, the al-qawi, the powerful, meaning His power. So Allah says in the Quran, He has power over everything. Right? And these are just some verses from the first surah of the Quran. This is mentioned again and again in the Quran to clarify and also to relate it to the context of the particular verse. So to clarify even further the extent of Allah's power, there's a negation. It's very important when we say like La ilaha, there's no other deity except Allah. There's negation and there's affirmation to clarify it. So when it comes to the power of Allah, not only was it affirmed, but it was also, the opposite was negated. There is absolutely nothing which can weaken Allah. Nothing can weaken Allah in any way whatsoever. So that's very important to have both of these concepts when we're talking about the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's take one manifestation which we've already saw. One manifestation of Allah's power is that He neither gets tired, neither fatigue nor sleep afflicts Him. He neither gets tired nor does He get worn out, nor does He need to recharge or anything like that. That's one manifestation of the power of Allah. So this verse is giving you more details about this one attribute of Allah, about His power and about His strength. Okay? When you look at the attributes of Allah furthermore, it also shows that He's not limited by anything. And He's not confined by anything. And this is part of the power of Allah. Because if anyone is limited by something, it means that they don't possess full power. Okay, now this is a point where you need to really pay attention, otherwise you're going to get lost. Okay, so if you're dozing, come back for at least a minute. Okay? This means that Allah is not limited by anything, and that includes laws that He created, such as gravity. So Allah is not bound by gravity, and you say, well, Allah goes up, then how does He come down or something? He's not bound by gravity. And He's not even bound by time or space. Okay, now this is really important to understand. That Allah is not bound or limited by time and space. The problem that human beings have in understanding this sentence makes sense to you. But when you start going and asking questions about Allah knowing the future and Allah knowing the past and Allah knowing what you were going to do before you even did it and all of that, if you forget this sentence, then you become confused. The moment you remember the sentence, it kind of helps you guide the way to answering some of these questions which we're going to be talking about very soon. Okay, so this is very important. So if Allah is not bound by time, that means that He doesn't exist within time. So if Allah does not exist within time, when we said that He knows the past, present and future, which we're going to talk about, there's no issue. Because He doesn't exist within time. And you say, well, that doesn't make sense. How can anybody, no matter how intelligent, know past, present and future, know things that have not happened yet, and yet didn't determine that? Say, because you're thinking about it while you yourself are bound by time and space. Every time you start thinking about it, you try to rationalize it, your rationalization is always wrong because you're in time and space. You cannot think outside of time and space. You cannot rationalize outside of time and space. Okay, so just keep this point with you, and we're going to be coming back to it in a little bit. That's why it's actually better to say that Allah transcends time and space, rather than saying that Allah encompasses time and space. Right? So this comes to the whole issue about, and I don't want to go into too many details, but this goes to the whole issue about, is Allah everywhere or is Allah not everywhere? The best answer is, well, where is Allah? Allah transcends time. That's it. Allah transcends time. However you want to answer that, however you want to articulate that, say Allah is above everything. Which means Allah is outside of that. Okay? Which means Allah is not existent within time and space. The reason why that is, I don't want to get into too much detail, but the reason why that is the moment that you try to explain Allah being within time and space, it creates, one, a confusion of answering other questions, and two, it leads people to the idea that, well, Allah is right here, Allah is right here. And this leads to several problems. Okay? Let's look at another thing now. Allah is all powerful. Right? Okay, so now I know this is gonna confuse some people. Some people have had this question, it's been bothering them, so hopefully, inshallah, it's gonna be like a big relief for you once you get hopefully a good answer to it. And other people are gonna get annoyed by the question. Okay? But this is a question that's asked. Okay, so you have to try and figure it out. And the question is, okay, is that if Allah can do anything, right? We believe, the Quran says Allah can do anything, right? So if Allah can do anything, can He create a rock that's too heavy for Him to lift? Who says yes? Raise your hand. Repeat the question. Okay. This question can be worded in many different ways. If Allah has power to do anything, okay, then can He create a rock that's too heavy for Him to lift? Well, I'll tell you why it's relevant later. For the most part, it's an irrelevant question, but it becomes relevant a little bit later. It's kind of important to just go through this analysis. Let's look at the answer. Okay, those people who said no, why do you say no? Oh, okay, bringing that point in, good. He's not bound by time and space. But Allah can do anything, right? You believe Allah can do anything. He doesn't lift. Okay. Let me rephrase. That's good. Let me rephrase it. Can Allah create a rock that is so powerful that He Himself doesn't have power over it and it overpowers Him? Can He or can He not? He cannot create it. So then someone says, if He can't create, then He can't do everything. Can He do anything? You just said Allah, the Quran says He can do anything. And you said, yeah, He can do anything. And I said, can He do this? And you said, no. Someone who just has some slick debate skills, what are you going to say to them? I know many Muslims who've actually encountered this, and they were faced with this question, and they answered no, because obviously you're trying to say, no, Allah is all powerful, they can never happen. And they say no, and He says, you just said Allah can do everything, so you don't believe that anymore. Say, yeah, okay. He can't do everything, but He can do a lot. What happened now? Okay, so you're saying the question is infinite loop, because in a sense that it has a problem. The question itself has a problem. And that's exactly the correct answer. The correct answer is that the question is wrong. When you say the question is wrong, what's wrong with the question? I can ask whatever question I want. No, let's break it down now. Okay, let's look at the question in detail. Okay, if Allah can do anything, then can He create a stone that's too heavy for Him to lift? Okay, that's the question. Or for Him to move, or whatever it is, right? The question is known as a logically invalid question. The reason why is because it's assuming a false premise. And the premise is, by definition, nothing can exist, right? Nothing can possibly exist without Allah having power over it in the first place. So that's already a definition. So if you've already defined that, you can't ask a question against the definition. So to make it clearer for you, can Allah do everything? Can Allah do anything? You say yes, Allah can do anything. Can Allah create a four-sided triangle? So yes, Allah can create a four-sided triangle. If you say yes, and you say, that's weird, because there's no such thing as a four-sided triangle. Right? And if you say no, then you say, well, see, Allah's not all-powerful. He can't do everything. The problem with the question is that a triangle is defined as something which has three sides. So how can Allah do something which is impossible in the first place? Impossible meaning the question doesn't make sense. So I'll give you another question which is similar to this but different, which makes it very clear. Can Allah create water that is not water? Does that make sense? See, so that question looks very foolish. It's a stupid question, right? The question, you can see that. I mean, you can imagine that some people in like the hills, they see a wise man and he starts asking, can Allah create water? That's not water. I bet you this guy will have a following. Wow, Pir Saab is so intelligent, He just speaks in riddles. He's just so eloquent. We can't understand him. This question doesn't make any sense, does it? Right? Because water has a definition. And then you say, can Allah make water that's not water? Okay, if it's water, then it's not water. You've just contradicted yourself in the question. The question doesn't have any answer. It's like asking nothing, right? So the problem is with the question. So you have to be careful about definitions and false premise questions. Otherwise, you're going to get confused. That's why all the questions which try to negate the power of Allah are always based on false assumptions about Allah. And the moment you give in to the false assumption, if you answer yes or you answer no, you're wrong. That's the problem. It's similar to Islamic law. Right? When we studied Islamic law, remember, I told you specifically, if somebody comes to you in the bathroom while you're making wudu, and you say, you know what? Is it true that you can wipe over your socks? You say yes or do you say no? What would you say? Who says yes? Raise your hand. Can you wipe over your socks during wudu? Okay. Who says no? Raise your hand. Okay. In this context, if someone were to ask you this question, if you say yes, you did not tell them the conditions of wiping over. So your answer is wrong. And if you say no, then you lied to them. Because there are types of socks and different opinions that you are allowed to wipe. So whether you answer yes or no, your answer is wrong. Right? This is similar, but a little bit different. This is similar, where you need to be more careful in your statements. Otherwise, you're going to be making a mistake. I'll give you all three examples one more time. If Allah can do anything, then can He create a stone that's too whatever to make Him move? He cannot move it. He doesn't have power over it. Second one is, can Allah create a four-sided triangle? The third question is, can Allah create water that is not water? So the thing is, basically what I've given you three different ones. They're all three are invalid questions. The third one is the easiest to see that it's a ridiculous question. The second one is a little bit easier for you to see that it's ridiculous. The first one is where many people get caught off guard because they're so busy focusing on Allah is all powerful, Allah is all powerful, and they're trying to figure out a way to show the other person that Allah is all powerful and give them an answer. And the question doesn't have an answer because the question is false in the first place. If someone says, can Allah create water that's not water? Would you say yes or no? What kind of question is this? What kind of weird questions this doesn't even make any sense. So you don't answer these type of questions. So this is the only time people get confused up on these questions. And this is an old thing. This is nothing new. This is actually an old argument. This is from a 7th century Hijri book. Why is this relevant? Okay, so the reason why it's relevant, I don't know how old this argument is, but it's a very common argument among Christians today, among Christian missionaries in particular. Right? They try to use this type of argument of possibility to argue that Allah can have a partner. And that's where the conversation begins. So, you Muslims say that Allah cannot have a partner. Right? When you say He doesn't have a partner, you mean He cannot? Absolutely not? You say no. How can Allah have a partner? You say, don't you believe that Allah can do anything? Say, of course Allah can do everything. He can do anything He wants. Then why can't Allah create a son? Hypothetically, just saying hypothetically. Can He create a son or He cannot create a son? And then you say, oh, well, yeah, okay, yeah, true, Allah can do anything. Okay, Allah can create a son. So we got you. So that's like, reeling in the fish. Now the fish took the bait, you're reeling them in, and you say, okay, now that you've admitted that He can, right? If He had a son, don't you think it's important that we learn about Him? That we know about Him? And that we respect Him? And then the conversation continues. This is why it's careful to not give in to these little steps, because if you do, you just start, you snowball down. You start giving in because you answered the question wrong in the first place. So, you should be very careful about that. Why is that a problem? Because what's the problem with this question? Say, if God can do anything, He could potentially have a son, right? The question is a trap because when you say that somebody has a son, what is the definition? Always define what the question is specifically asking. Right? You have to define things according to your standards. And you do not accept the definitions other people give you. Right? And we talked about this when we talked about the infinite loop of creators. Remember when we said who created Allah? You have to define Allah as being uncreated before you try to answer the question. Otherwise, you give in to the definition of somebody else, and you have a problem. Right? In terms of this, what does it mean to have a child? By definition of our understanding of what a child is, dictionary definition. What does it mean? Not necessarily. When you envision, when you picture anything, what is the loosest definition of having a child that you can imagine, you could possibly imagine? If all of a sudden, some being just pops out over here, could I call this person my child? No, you can never do that because there's one major ingredient missing that has to be there for this whatever thing that popped out to be a child. Part of you, it's the process. Right? The process of generation. The way that this thing was generated or came into being was through me in some way or form. But it had to be through me rather than independent of me. Right? That's what it means by child. And the thing is, to say that Allah has a child means that Allah does not need to use that type of means to create. He does not need to use that type of means to create. So therefore it's an insult to Allah to actually say that He had to utilize these means, or He utilized these means to create, and somehow something emerged out of Him, and therefore it's His child. Right? Whereas He could create everything else independently, and that's not considered to be His children. Right? So this is a big problem. So it's very important. It's like saying, same thing. Somebody comes and says, you know what? Well, Allah can do anything, right? So can Allah eat? And if you say, yeah, okay, Allah can do anything, so He can eat. Can Allah defecate? Can He use the bathroom? Can He do all of these things? And if you keep saying, yeah, He can do everything, what are you doing? In essence, you're disrespecting Allah to the worst extent. Right? You're just basically taking all these attributes which are defective attributes and throwing them into Allah when He doesn't need any of these things. That's what you're basically saying. So you're saying, you know what? Allah has all these great attributes and there's no defect in them, but He does all these things which are actually characteristic of all people who have defects. That's the biggest insult to anybody. That's the biggest insult. Right? You can't get any worse than that. So that's why we should be careful when we talk about the might and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now Allah is the creator. Okay, so let's talk about Allah being the creator. When we say Allah is the creator, we mean a number of things. We mean, number one, that Allah can create from nothing. And He doesn't have to be anything there, and He can create. And it also means that He creates from things which are already there in the first place. So let's take an example. The first human being was created from what? From mud. How do we know that? Through revelation. Oh, where did the mud come from? The earth. Okay? Where did the earth come from? Where did it come from? What is its origin? Going all the way back. Somehow it was created from nothing. In the end. Right? Going all the way back. So Allah creates from nothing something, and also He takes something and He puts the constituents together and He creates something else, and that's called creation. So when you were created, right, were you created from nothing? Yes or no? Created from nothing? No, you specifically, you. People, what kind of process? Right, so there was something coming together, matter, atoms reorganizing themselves, turning into cells, multiplying. You are created from something, but it's still called creation. Alright? Still Allah created you. So there's two ways that He created. He creates things from nothing, and He creates other things from things that He already created before. Constituent parts to reorganize them together. Okay, so both of these fall under the category of creation. Now the second thing to know is that Allah creates through His knowledge and through His will. Now the reason why that's important to specify is because that means that nothing was unintentionally created. And nothing just happened by accident. So remember we talked about the Greeks before, early in the class? I know it's been a very long time, like 3 weeks, right? We talked about the Greeks. What did they believe? Yeah, we know that. We believe in the multiple gods. What else? What did they believe about creation? That Allah created without knowing and without intending. That it is something that naturally just, the world just kind of came out of Allah. Not by choice, not through knowledge, not by will, it just kind of happened. This is a belief that's been resurrected and is believed by modern deists. Many modern deists, they believe something very similar. What is a deist, first of all? What is a deist? Who's downloaded the Word Web already? This should be very easy for you. Okay, what is a deist? Yes. So somebody believes in a creator, that something created, but nothing beyond that. No religion, no book. The creator cannot communicate, has no connection with the world. It just happened and everything else is separate. Nothing beyond that. Okay, that's a deist. Alright, so this is becoming a very, it's like a new fad basically. A lot of atheists are coming back and becoming deists. Which doesn't mean that they're going to move anywhere further. They just kind of come back and they stop and they say, okay, we're here now and that's it. We're basically at the same point. So it's important to understand that Allah created through His knowledge as well as through His will without needing to do so. And that's important. Without needing to do so. Why is that important? Because He chose to create. Let's talk about what Allah says first of all. Allah says in the Quran, I have not created the jinn and humankind but to worship me. Most people know this verse. What comes afterwards? And He says, I demand of them no provision, nor do I demand that they should feed me. So what's the point? The point that Allah is trying to say is, I created all of these people to worship me, but I don't need anything from them. I did not create them with any need. So they're there to serve me, but they're not there because I needed to create them. Now the reason why that's important is because a lot of people, they ask, will say, you know what? Why did Allah create all of this? Right? And hidden in their statement is this false assumption that Allah needed to create. So well, why did Allah have to create us? That kind of statement with that tone has a false assumption built in. And that's it. What does Allah get out of it? Wanting to know what's the reason, why did Allah need to do that in the first place? And this gives you at least the definition part, and we're going to go more on it. The definition, Allah created without needing to do so. And that's very important to have clear in your mind before you move on to anything else. So Allah mentions that in the Quran. I have not created the jinn and humankind but to know and worship me exclusively. I demand of them no provision, nor do I demand that they should feed me. I mean, I don't have any needs from this creation. So what is Allah basically saying? He's saying, I am not in need even of being worshipped. I'm not in need of food. I don't need you to help me. I don't need you to take care of me. I created you, but not because I need you. In fact, it's the opposite, is that you actually need me, and that's the way you've been created. So we need Allah. So when people go and they ask the question, well, why does Allah want us to worship Him? What does He get out of it? So no, it's you need to worship Him, not that He needs your worship. And there's a statement, there's a hadith, a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which makes it clear. He said that Allah says, O my servants, even if all of you, from the first to the last, and the entire human race of yours, and that of the jinns, became as pious as the most pious person, it would not add anything to my power or kingdom. Even if you were all the best, most amazing people ever, which we're not at all, but even if you were, that would not actually benefit me in any way. It wouldn't do me any favor or anything like that. And He said, O my servants, even if all of you from the first and the last and the entire human race of yours and that of the jinns became as wicked as the most wicked person, everyone became like a pharaoh, like the worst person you can imagine, it would not decrease anything from my power or my kingdom. It wouldn't harm me. It's not what you guys do, whether you worship or you do bad or you steal from each other and you kill each other or something, that doesn't really affect me. So whenever people ask this question, well, what does Allah get out of it? Or why did Allah create it? Or why did Allah do this? Those questions need to be answered from your perspective, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. Right? when somebody asks, why did Allah create all these people? Right? Why did Allah create us? What answer do you give? Okay, to worship with will, to worship free will. Okay. What if somebody says, no, that's not what I'm asking. I want to know why did Allah create us? You understand the difference? What's the reason? What's the, what does he get out of it? Entertainment? So it's like a play that he's watching to be the Khalifa of the earth. He said, no, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking why. Why not just not create us? Right? So what she said was, you have to ask Allah to actually know the reason. And because He didn't tell you why, you can't really know why. So let's take an example. Okay? The thing is, if you have an employee that's hired in a company, right? And then you go and you ask the employee, why were you hired? Right? Why were you hired in this company? So there are two perspectives when you ask this question. The first perspective is from the company's or the boss's perspective. And you could say, well, you know what? From the boss's perspective, the answer could be, well, I was qualified for the job. Right? They needed me. Or the company needed more workers. My boss needed a secretary. That's from the company or the boss's perspective. Right? Then there's from the employee's perspective. Why were you hired? And the employee can say, I'm here to help the company become the best company in the world. I'm here to help the research department. Or he can give another answer. I was hired because I'm extremely intelligent and I'm really good at what I do, and therefore I've been hired for this reason. So when you ask the question, why were you hired? You can either be asking the question from the perspective of, why did the company decide to hire you? And what was going on in their mind? What were they thinking when they decided to hire you in the first place? Or you can answer the question from your perspective in terms of, why are you here now and what are you supposed to be doing? Right? And when it comes to knowing the purpose of life, we can only answer the latter question from our perspective, because Allah told us that. From the perspective of Allah, He did not tell us. Why? And even if He did, it wouldn't make any difference. Right? Because it wouldn't clarify, it wouldn't change anything in terms of what your role is. So I'll give you the traditional example. Okay? Traditional example is if there's a king, and the king sends a messenger and says, I want you to go and I want you to deliver this message to this other person. And I want you to make sure to preserve this message. I want you to make sure to deliver it in a certain amount of time. This message is so urgent, it needs to reach this person in this span of time. And then somebody meets him along the way and says, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm going to deliver the message. Well, why are you delivering the message? And they say, well, because the message needs to get there on time. That's an answer for the purpose. But if somebody starts saying, no, I want to know what was the intention or the underlying purpose of the king when he was giving you the letter. What's the purpose behind all of that in detail? The thing is, your answer to that question is not going to change your mission. It's not going to change your purpose. And that's one of the reasons why Allah decided we don't need to know that. And even if we knew that, we probably wouldn't be able to understand it, because Allah is unlimited. He's infinite. Again. So you have to be very careful and you have to be cautious in the sense that when people ask that question, and they ask it in a way where they're not happy with the answers that you've given, they're asking it from Allah's perspective. Meaning we want to know from Allah's perspective, why did He create us? Not from your perspective, from His perspective. You see, that's not something that you can know. And usually they're trying to do that in order to question His reasoning or His wisdom of why He did it in the first place. And if you can't know, then you can't question it. Right? You can't question something that you can actually ever know. You can never know. So what's the point of questioning it? So important to look out for that. So as the Quran says, they cannot grasp any part of His knowledge without His permission. So there are things that Allah knows that you don't know, and unless He gave you permission to know it, you'll never be able to figure it out, no matter how hard you try. And this question has eluded and confused so many thinkers who tried to figure it out. They tried their best to come up with explanations. but they were never able to do so, and they will never be able to do so because it's not something you can just figure out. Even if it was me, right? If you didn't know, you just walked in the room and you don't know me, you don't know anything, and all of a sudden you see me, I move this water bottle like this, and I move it like that. Can you figure out, I'm a human being, can you figure out why I moved it in that pattern? Try your best. Try your best to figure it out. You can think, you can research, you can study my life, you can figure out what's going on. Why did he move it exactly in that pattern? You're never going to be able to figure it out. I had a reason though. There was a reason, but you're never going to figure it out. Unless I tell you. Unless I tell you. Right? No matter, you can watch the video, you can try and think why? You're not going to be able to figure it out. Just so you know, the reason I actually drew an A, a triangular form, because it's a style that I like. It's one of my artistic styles that I like. That's why I did it. You would never figure that out if I didn't tell you. Right? You could never come up with it. So the thing is that if you are not told this, you can never know. But you don't need to know. You don't need to know. All you need to know is from your perspective, what's your job? Right? If the boss at work tells you, you know what, you need to clean these dishes, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that. This is what you need to get done in order for the company to work. I wonder why the boss wants me to clean it this way. Why not the other way? At the end of the day, either you do it or you're going to get fired. Your job is to do it. Right? Whether you understand everything or you don't understand everything. You understand half, you get some wisdom, that's the point. So, keep that in mind. Allah is eternal. Allah is eternal, and He says, Allah is the first and the last. Okay, and this is the best way of describing Allah, the first and the last. What does this imply? This implies that Allah existed before everything. Because what is the first? The first means there is nothing before. What is before the first? There can't be anything before the first. That's the best way of saying that is completely all the way before anything else. Nothing is before Him. And the last, what comes after the last? There's nothing after the last. So that means there's nothing after Him. In a sense, that means Allah is infinite. Infinite from the beginning and infinite from the end. Now, knowing that Allah is the first actually has many benefits. And the reason why it has many benefits is people ask these questions, and we've discussed this question before. People ask the question, who created Allah? And what did we say the answer was? The answer is no one. He was always there. That's it. That's because of the definition. Once you define Allah as being the first, and then say, oh, if somebody says, oh, so the guy came in first, he was in first place, so who came before him? Is that even a legitimate question? No. See, the other guy who was running the marathon, man, this guy, he lost the race so bad, he was the last person. And some smart guy goes, really, he was last? Who came after him? That person's not smart anymore, right? Because that's a question that doesn't even make sense. Why are you asking that? It's against the definition in the first place. So asking that kind of question doesn't make sense in the first place. There's no reason. The answer is, He was always there. But the false premise in the question of who created Allah is, it can be identified. What is the actual false premise? The premise is, people say, I want to know, how did Allah come into being? That's what they want to know. I want to know, how did Allah come into being? And what is wrong with the premise? He did not come into being. That's it. So it says, I want to know, how did Allah come into being? He didn't come into being. No, but I want to know how. It's like somebody saying, you know what, the guy got first place. Right? He said, what about the other guy? The other guy got second place. So he got second place. I want to know how he got first place. I just said he got second place. No, I want to know, how did he come in first? It doesn't make sense to me. What kind of question is that? It's a wrong question. So be very careful about false premise questions. So Allah is eternal. Okay, Allah is eternal. The knowledge of Allah. Allah has complete knowledge of everything. That means that Allah has the specific detailed knowledge as well as the general knowledge, that He knows the big picture. Right? So He knows every small little thing that happens, and He knows on the grand scale of what's happening in terms of the connections. Not just randomly what's happening on a small level. So when you go and you zoom into a microscope and you look at exactly what little details are happening, if you only look at that small aspect, you zoomed in, you're not getting the big picture anymore. You can't do both at the same time and see exactly what's going on. Right? You can't get everything. You can't figure out everything. The connections between things, Allah knows both. And again, I mentioned before, this is something where the Greeks messed up. And this is something that actually influenced Muslims to such an extent that many Muslims who were influenced by Greek philosophy actually somehow came up with the idea that Allah knows general things but He doesn't know specific things. And you'll find this in the books of some Muslim philosophers in particular. Now how they reconcile that with the Quran and everything, that's beyond the scope of this class, but they do that, so you have to be very careful. So it's important to understand the knowledge of Allah implies everything. Let's take a look at the verse. He knows whatever is on land and in the sea. So land and sea, that encompasses everything in the earth, right? And not a leaf falls but He knows it. Even a leaf falling down from a tree, something so insignificant that you would think that no one can you imagine anyone documenting every leaf that falls from a tree? Project could never even happen. And neither is there a grain in the dark layers of the earth, nor anything green or fresh or dry, except it's recorded in a manifest book, meaning with the knowledge of Allah. Allah has knowledge of every single tiny detail of what's going on in the world. That's when it comes to objects and things, right? And also, Allah says, do they not know that God knows what they keep concealed and their private counsels and gossips, and that God has full knowledge of the whole of the unseen? Meaning that He knows even the thoughts that every person has. And His knowledge of your thoughts does not distract Him from knowing what someone else is thinking. So there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to limit His knowledge. His knowledge can never be limited. No matter how many people there are or how many things there are, He has full knowledge of all of these things. That's what we're talking about, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also it says, He knows what lies before them and what lies after them. We're talking about the knowledge of time. Allah knows the past, and He knows the present, and He knows the future. So far we talked about present. He knows what's happened in the past as well. Now for us that's very easy to, not too difficult to understand. You can know some things in the past. He knows everything that happened in the past. But He also knows the future. Okay, He knows all of them. Okay, this is His knowledge. And that's full knowledge. So Allah clarifies that in the Quran. So that's His knowledge. Now we get to the will of Allah. Okay, and this can get a little bit confusing sometimes. What does the will of Allah actually mean? It means that when Allah decides something or when Allah wills something to happen, it will happen. Whenever He wills or decides something's going to happen this way or that way or whatever, it will happen, and nothing can prevent Allah from enacting His will. From His will from actually happening. Alright, so if you, let's take an example of you. If you decide, okay, you know what? I want to lift this water bottle. You say, okay, it's my will and I lift it up, I lift it. Great. So you know what? I want to lift this table. So okay, I can do it. It's my will. I decide I want to lift this table up, I can lift it up. So you know what? I want to lift up this entire building. You can't do it. Alright? You're limited. You can't do it. No matter how much you want to, you can't do it. When Allah wants to do something, when He wills something, it will always happen and no one can stop Him from doing that. And that's what Allah says, yet had God so willed, they would not have fought against each other. But God does whatever He wills. He does whatever He wills. So what is this verse? This verse is talking about some people who are fighting each other. Okay, I'm not going to get into the context of the verse. But it means that Allah decided to let these people fight. So if somebody says, you know what, well, why didn't Allah just stop them? Allah could have stopped them. Say, of course Allah could have stopped them. But Allah decided and willed that He's going to allow them to continue fighting, and therefore they're fighting. So it's by the will of Allah. When somebody does something, It's happening by the will of Allah. And when Allah makes somebody else do something, it's also by the will of Allah. Okay? The problem arises when the will of Allah becomes confused with the desire of Allah. And the reason why there's a confusion is because the word will and the word want and the word desire, and even in the Arabic, arada, yuridu, yurid, they have two meanings. These words, one word has two different connotations. And if you use it in the wrong connotation, you're going to confuse yourself or you're going to confuse other people. So you have to be very careful. So let's take a look at one verse. Allah says in the Quran, God wills, yuridu, same as the first one, same word, yuridu, He wills, and yuridu. God wills ease for you. And He does not will hardship for you. This is talking about fasting. So Allah wills, yuridu, that it's easy on you. Fasting is easy on you, and that it's not difficult on you. And He gives you some concessions. Let's say even with the concessions, somebody comes and says, you know what? That was very difficult. That was very difficult. It was not easy for me at all. You say, okay, that was difficult for you. So yeah, that was very hard. I found it very hard. And Allah willed that it's supposed to be easy. And Allah does whatever He wills, and nothing can frustrate or stop Him, His will. So therefore, why did I feel hardship? Does that mean that the will of Allah was not enforced? It didn't take place? No. Why? Because, let me explain. So will, or the irada of Allah, has two meanings. There are two types of wills. One of them is the creative or the effective will. Okay? Which means that it's talking about whether things will occur or they will not occur. Whether things will happen or they will not happen. So for example, if Allah wills that something is going to move, will it move? It'll move. Exactly the way that Allah wills it to move. It cannot stop. If Allah wills that somebody is going to die, that person will die. And if Allah wills that someone's going to live, they will live. And nothing can stop them because Allah willed that. Right? That's why we say in common language, what do we say? Say, you know what? Allah didn't will that this would happen. Right? So you say, you know what? I failed my exam. You say, you know what? This was by the will of Allah. Right? Allah willed that you would fail. You say, you know, that's I guess it had to happen that way, right? That is the creative or effective will, meaning there could be no other way that this would have happened. Because Allah decided it to be that way. Now we see the problem here, right? Now people are saying, why did Allah have to will me to fail? You know, why couldn't He just will me to pass? That means I was doomed from the beginning. This is where people start going, right? They start drifting. I'm doomed. Say, Allah willed you to fail. I was set up for failure. That's pretty much what people understand, right? But there's a mistake because the wording is being confused. We're talking about the creative or effective will, that Allah determines something. Then there's the legal or the desired will, what Allah wants. Okay? This will determine the reward and the punishment of a person. This is going to determine what Allah actually wants people to do. So for example, if Allah wills that people only worship Him. Allah wills and wants people only worship Him. Will there be people who don't worship Allah? If Allah wills that people only worship Him, can there be people that don't worship Him? See the confusion of words? So the second will, yes, there are people. Now, if somebody says, does Allah want that these people don't worship Him? No, Allah wants you to worship Him, but there are people who don't. So which will are we talking about? See, the wording confuses people if you don't identify the term. So this we're talking about what Allah desires. Okay? So when we say, this person did what Allah did not want or Allah did not will to do. What does that mean? Does that mean that Allah, the person overpowered Allah or went against the will of Allah? This second type of will is different. That's why the wording of will and want and desire or different thing, maybe here the wording want or desire would be better. But you could still use the word want in the first context and you become confused again. You say, you know what? Allah wanted this to move from here to here. Does that mean that it was His creative or effective will that He wanted it, He determined that it was going to move? Or does it mean that He wanted it to move, but He was not going to actually make it move? Two different things. This is the confusion. When the first will, the creative or effective will, goes against or goes to the opposite of what is the legal or the desired will, then the wording becomes ambiguous and it becomes confusing. This is what some pagan Arabs used and is mentioned in the Quran. So let's take a look. Those who persist in associating partners with God will say, the people who worship idols, what will they say? Or what did they say? Had Allah willed, neither we nor our forefathers would have associated partners with Him. See the statement? If Allah willed, we wouldn't have done this. But Allah willed, therefore we did this. What's the problem with the statement? Is there a problem? Is this a justification? They're basically saying, you know what? Allah can't blame us because He willed that we were going to worship the idols. And Allah does what He wills. Nobody can stop Allah when He wills something. Is this a good excuse? No. How is it not a good excuse? We got the no part, we're there, but how do you explain that this is not a good excuse? Okay, so which will are they using? The first one, right? So they're using the be and it is. They're using that in the context of the second one. So they're mixing it up and they're using the second one to justify their own actions. Alright? This is the problem. This is the root of the problem. There's another one. Those who associate partners with Allah, they say, had Allah so willed, we would not have worshipped anything other than Him. Same thing, confusing the two wills. Now to clarify, there was an incident in history which maybe it's easier to relate to. Okay? So Umar, he caught a thief stealing something. And he said, you know what? You should not punish me. So why shouldn't I punish you? He said, because I did this by the will of Allah. Allah willed that I was going to steal, therefore you cannot blame me. Which will is he using? He's using the first will, but in reality, which will? The second will. Meaning Allah didn't want you to steal, but you stole anyways. So what did Umar do? Umar used his same wording to make him understand how he's mistaken. And he said, you're right. You're right. This happened by the will of Allah. And he said, and now I'm going to cut your hand off by the will of Allah. So Allah willed that I'm going to amputate your hand. So what is Umar trying to do? Umar knows that this guy is playing with words. So he said, I'm going to play with the words and use your logic to do the same thing. So I have to do this as well because Allah willed that I'm going to do this. Right? So this is the confusion of the two wills. So we have to be careful about that. So to clarify in another way to understand it is that when somebody wants to do something for themselves, right, that's connected to their own action. So when I want to move this, it's connected to my action. So when Allah decides to do something from His own self, from His action, that's always going to happen. But when I want to do something that's connected to you, meaning I want you to do it, then that's connected to your action. So that's the difference between the two wills. The first one is connected to the action of Allah. The second one is connected to somebody else's action. Okay, one more time. The first will, the creative will, is connected to the action of Allah. Allah decides to do something according to His own actions. It will always happen. When Allah wills or wants somebody else to do something in their actions, then they make the decision. That doesn't mean Allah is forcing the will upon them. Okay? So it's connected to either your own action or it's connected to somebody else's action. Sometimes Allah will order somebody to do something, second will. He will order somebody to do something and He will actually help them to achieve that. Meaning He will use the first creative will or effective will while mandating that they should be doing the thing. And there are some times where Allah will order somebody to do something, but He will not help them at all, and He will leave them to do it themselves for a certain wisdom. Because He's not obligated to help you every single time. And when He's not helping you, there's a reason and there's a wisdom why He's not helping you. And that's why it's very important to understand these two wills, especially when we come to verses like one. We saw these ones, these people making the excuse. This one is pretty clear because it tells you. It tells you that, you know what, the idolaters are saying this. So you know in the end of the day, whether you can explain it or not explain it, the Quran is already telling you, any statement out of the idolater is going to be wrong anyways. There's no way the Quran is going to actually give a legitimate justification for idolatry in the Quran. So even if you can't explain it, you know the answer at the end of the day. But when it comes to a verse like a prophet, one of the prophets, he said, my advice will not benefit you as much as I want to guide you if Allah has willed that you be misguided. Allah has willed that you be misguided. What does that mean? Allah willed that you are misguided. Does that mean the first will or the second will? No, this is a prophet speaking. If it's the first, the effective will, right? That means that Allah decreed and basically made this person go astray as a result of their own disobedience, right? But what does going astray mean? Disobedience. Let's focus on this. If Allah has willed that you be misguided, okay, let's look at the word misguided for a second. Okay, what does it mean to be misguided? Not necessarily to get guidance, but to go on to do the wrong thing, basically, right? You have options in front of you, and you choose the wrong thing, right? Okay, so now it's saying that you chose the wrong thing, and Allah willed that. So which will are we talking about? Allah's desire is that everyone is guided, okay? So it seems to me like you're saying the second one, if Allah wanted everyone to be guided, then you're actually saying it's the first. Because He allowed it. He willed to allow that this person be led astray or to move astray. Yes, so He wanted people to be guided. That's clear, right? But what did He will? He willed that this person will be left to stray without helping them to come back. Is that what you're saying? So the question, the real root of the question here is, this is kind of a trick question. What action is Allah taking when somebody is being misguided? What is the action? No action. Lack of guidance, meaning not bringing the person back. So leaving them. So we're talking about the first will, even though Allah's second will wants people to be guided. Does it make sense? But that's part of the learning process. I used to hate it when my teachers did the same thing. You know, Imam Abu Hanifa, this used to be his tactic actually. When he used to teach Islamic law, fiqh, he used to have his students, and he says, what is your opinion? What is your opinion? What is your opinion? And then he says, he goes and he gives answers to each and every single one of their opinions. You're wrong because of this, you're wrong because of this, you're wrong, and this is my opinion. And then he gives it, and all of them realize, you know what? He's right. He answered all of our opinions, and they all change. And they say, okay, you're right. You're correct. And then he says, actually, you know what? I just made that up. That's not my real opinion. Your opinion was actually correct. And I'm going to explain to you why your opinion was correct. So he used to play around with them, make them change their opinions back and forth. And at the end, he would give them the actual opinion. So that's just a way of learning. It's better to learn like this and understand it in the class. My teacher used to explain to me, I didn't like it when I first heard it, but really it's a wise statement. He said, you want to make as many mistakes as you can in the class because you're in the class. And the moment you get out in the outside world, you don't want to make the mistakes over there. So it's better to make them here so you're not going to be making them over there. If you don't make it over here, it means you're not thinking in the first place. You're not even bouncing any ideas off. You're saying, just give me the answer, and you're more likely to make mistakes outside. So it's better to make mistakes in the classroom so that you don't make mistakes outside. And that's a very wise statement. Really, I've seen it. That's why sometimes when we discuss these things, if you get confused for a moment, as long as you're confused in the class, and then you're clear when you walk out of the class, you're fine. Because if you're clear throughout the entire class, but you never really thought about it, you're going to get confused outside, and then you have a problem. Because you have nowhere else, you have no one to help, bring it back. So it's just keep that in mind. So don't get panicky if you start, thinking, oh, I'm lost in class. Oh, that was weird. As long as you're clear in the class when we're ready to leave, or you go and review your notes and then you're cleared out, you're okay. So don't worry if it happens in class. If it happens outside of class, then you start panicking and then you start, trying to clear it up. Okay, so now questions. Okay, let's take the easiest example. Umar and the thief. Okay, the guy stole something. Right? When he stole something, obviously he chose it, right? He went and he stole something. His fault, right? That's clear, right? Okay. Now when Umar said, we caught you. Now you're going to be punished because you stole. He tried to justify himself and he said, you know what? It's not right for you to punish me because I stole by the will of Allah. So Allah willed that I stole. Right? So what is the man trying to say? He's trying to say that when Allah wills something, it will always happen and no one else has any choice and can never stop it from happening. Therefore, if Allah willed that I stole, you can't punish me because Allah made it happen. I didn't make it happen. Allah made it happen. But in reality, the word will, he was playing on words. And the real thing, when he says Allah willed, it's a true statement but not the way he intended it. It means Allah wanted, Allah willed, meaning He allowed you to steal, but it doesn't mean that He wanted you to steal. So you can't justify by saying that Allah willed that I was going to steal because He didn't want you to steal. Allowing it to happen and desiring it to happen. Just keep these two words with you. So Allah allows it to happen with His first will, but He does not desire it to happen. And that's the manifestation of the second will. He desired to allow it. He didn't desire that the man do it. So again, that's the second way to understand it. The desiring to allow it, the allowing is coming from the action of Allah. It's connected to the action of Allah. The desiring that the man doesn't steal is connected to the action of the man. That's why they're two separate wills. It's not that it wasn't his command. The man was trying to blame Allah for the theft. And that's not justified. Right? So if anyone goes and kills somebody else and says, well, Allah willed this, so you can't blame me. You can blame the guy, right? Yeah, that's the obvious part. Now, when somebody comes to you and tries to justify it and says, you know what, you can't touch me because Allah made this happen and I had no choice in it. Allah wanted me to do this. No. So you see, when he said Allah willed that I do this, he's actually saying Allah wanted me to do it and I did what Allah wanted me to do. Let's only focus on normal people. Okay, let's focus on happy people. All right? Okay, just try to focus on these two terms in terms of Allah's action connected to Himself and Allah's action connected to somebody else. Keep this example and just reflect upon it throughout the week and send me an email if you need more clarification. Okay? There's two word desires. Again, this is why I'm saying it's confusing because one word has two meanings. All right? So, like the word bee. Right? If I just tell you the word, bee, which bee am I talking about? The buzzing bee or the bee, like the word be? Which bee am I talking about? Right? So the thing is, you have to differentiate in the context of the sentence that you're using. So when you say Allah, when Allah wants something, it's going to happen. He wants it for Himself. He Himself wants an action to happen, or He wants somebody else to do something. Two different things. Right? So the second one, there's no force. That's all it is. The second will has no force. The first will has force. Yeah. So there's a choice. If Allah wanted to force it, yeah, He could force it. But He's given you the choice when it comes to the second thing. So when Allah tells you not to drink, that's a desire, right? Does Allah want people to commit murder? No. Do people commit murder? Yes. Why? Because He allowed them to, but it doesn't mean that He wanted them to. Just focus on it. Okay, read the notes, focus on it, and next class, if you're still confused, then we have an issue and we'll sit down. Okay? What we were talking about before. When Allah wills that somebody's misguided, what does it mean? It means that He allows them to stray, but He does not desire them to stray. Okay. What does the barrier on the heart actually mean? And how did the barrier get there? This is another topic, but the barrier got there due to their own actions. And their own actions were a result of their own decisions. So it was their decision to actually be misguided, to go off in the wrong direction. And putting the barrier on their heart simply meant that Allah is not going to force them back to guidance. That's what the barrier implies. Okay? I know the wording is different, but that's what it implies. Yeah, allowed is always going to be associated with the first one. The second one is halal and haram. That's all it is. This is halal, this is haram. You either don't do this or you do this. This is fard and this is haram, basically. Right? That's what the second one is talking about. And when people, leave aside the last verse. Okay, the last verse can confuse people. Just focus on understanding these examples. Why, when somebody tries to mix up the two, it's not a justification. Okay, because the same word is used. Yurid, arada and yuridu. Okay, just keep that in mind, inshallah. The Prophet about saying misguidance, yeah. The first one by allowing. So we'll stop here. If you're confused, try not to be confused. Reflect upon, read the text, clarify it. Inshallah, if you have any questions, just ask me. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.